I'm Don Dickson, and I want to thank you for joining me for another edition of our master class. We've been discussing over the last few weeks detail mapping of structure. In the last couple of sessions, we have spent on detail mapping of man-made structure, which of course we are finding in man-made reservoirs. So today I'm going to conclude that discussion, and we're really going to be wrapping up our entire study on mapping and interpretation of structure, which included both general mapping and detail mapping. I'm going to start today by sharing with you one of my trade secrets. Many of you know I did a television series actually with Kurt Gowdy years ago. And when I first met Kurt, it was a direct result of doing one of my promotions. And during that promotion, I had taken the local sports writer out fishing. And he ended up telling that story to Kurt Gowdy. And that piqued Kurt Gowdy's interest. Now, for those of you who are so young, you don't know who Kurt Gowdy is. He was one of the key announcers, key players for ABC television back years ago. He did Super Bowls, he did World Series, he did Wide World of Sports, he covered the Olympics, he did a lot of NFL. He was very well known announcer. But Kurt had this love, like you and me. He had this love of the outdoors. He loved to hunt and loved to fish. So I'm going to tell you this little story, and it's going to divulge in the process, it's going to divulge to you my trade secret, which I never really shared with anybody directly, but I felt like it just fit in for today, so I'm going to share that with you. Now, when I started with Buck, he told me that he was one single voice crying in the wilderness against all of the big money in the fishing business, in the industry. And because everything that he was teaching was so different than what people had come to have thought or find out over the years about catching fish, that no one wanted to really listen to him. They didn't believe what he was saying. He was telling people to fish deep when everybody knew that they're supposed to be fishing shallow. Then he told them to fish faster. They were fishing slow. Everything he seemed to say was different than what was the accepted way of catching fish. So it was hard for him to get his message out there. So the only way he felt he could do that was go to someone's local lake, catch fish in their lake, show them the fish, and tell them how he did it. No one would seem to believe that he did it somewhere else. He had to always prove it on someone else's lake. So at any rate, when I came on board, I had these visions of just advertising on television and, all of a sudden we'd just be really successful. And we get that message across to millions of people. Nah. Buck said, listen, if it was that easy, I'd have done it years ago. He said, I got a little money. I'd have spent some money. Of course, later on, I found that kind of hard to believe too, because he was pinching those pennies all the time. But he said he would have if he knew that it would be successful. He said, but people just didn't want to believe that fish lived in deep water. They didn't want to accept that, no matter how many times I told them. So the only way to prove it to them was to go out and fish their lake and be successful in their lake. Well, obviously, you can't fish every individual's lake. You can't reach every person in the country that goes fishing, 60 million people. You can't go fish 60 million lakes. So he had to pick and choose, the bigger cities where he had the biggest, crowds that might be able to hear what it was he was saying. And he'd pick local lakes that were around these big cities. Not thought to be great fishing holes, but just something that was close to the population. So that's how he introduced all of his educational material back in the day. And now here I am. I'm coming on board. He's looking to retire from it. And I thought there would be an easier path, but I found out there wasn't. No one would believe unless you proved it to them in their lake. Well, I realized there is no way I was going to be able to do that. I mean, once I had learned all my lessons from Buck and had the confidence, I could go catch fish anywhere. But I couldn't go fish everywhere. So, what was I to do? I started thinking, well, Buck used, from time to time, he'd use sports writers in that city by taking them fishing and proving to them that he could catch fish and do what he said he could do. So once he shared all that with me, I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense. If I get to the sports writer, to the outdoor writer of every one of these big cities and take them fishing, I'd be able to reach a lot of people. So that was going to be my plan. So I came up with this statement that I made to each and every writer in every city I ever went. I would go in and meet them, tell them I was going to be doing a clinic there the following weekend or whatever it was. And I wanted them to let their readership know that I was going to be there. Well, he didn't know who I was. Nobody else did either. And I said, so because you don't know me and don't know that this information is so valuable, you're probably not going to give me anything but that little 2x2. And I need more than that because it's that important to your readership that they hear this news, the good news, about how to consistently catch fish. So here's what I want to suggest to you. And this was the line I came up with that I used it all the time. I said, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. And that is, I want you to take me to a reservoir, local reservoir, any reservoir that you choose, and take a day and go fishing with me. And I will guarantee, within 1 hour, we'll be catching fish. So that was my story. That was my little blurted out there and see what the reaction would be. Take me to a reservoir, any reservoir, and within 1 hour, we'll be catching fish. Not only be catching fish, we'll be catching big fish. And I said it with a straight face. And so many of these writers, you know that they didn't think that that was possible. No one could make such an outrageous statement. But they were curious. So some of them would just say, well, how in the world do you have the confidence you can catch fish out there in my lake? And I had a stock answer for that. I said, well, listen, a fish is just a fish. A bass is just a bass. So a bass in New York is no different than a bass in California. He's the same critter. They don't change what they do. So if you understand the basic movements of fish, how they react to weather and water conditions, how they utilize bottom features as they move about in the lake from a daily standpoint or a seasonal standpoint. Once you understand all that, you can go anywhere and catch fish. And I'm willing to prove it to you. Well, I can tell you, I can only remember one guy who said he was just too busy. Everybody would always take me up on it because they knew they were going to prove me wrong. They knew it couldn't be done. Even Kirk Gotti, when I first met him, he said, I heard that you make the statement, take me to any reservoir, or take me to a reservoir, any reservoir, and within 1 hour we'll be catching big fish. No one, he said, I've been around fishing for 70 years. Nobody can make that statement. I just don't believe that's possible. And I said, take me up on it. Let me prove it to you. And fortunately for me, he did, because he had a great reputation. I used to sit on Sunday afternoons with my dad watching the American Sportsman. Man, that was a great show. Hunting and fishing. It was way before its time. And when I met Kurt, I asked him, how in the world were you able to do that great show years ago? I said it was so ahead of its time. He said it was simple. Roone Arledge, which was the boss man at ABC Sports back then, he said, I want to do this show, and he said, you have a blank check. He said, you can spend anything you want to spend. Just make it good. And he said, and that's what we did. I said, yeah, you sure did. You had us glued for an hour and a half every Sunday afternoon. We wouldn't miss it. And that's one of the sad things that I can say today, that my dad thought so much of Kirk Gotti. He passed away before I had that show. When I was on national television with Kirk Gotti, he would have just been so proud. But at any rate, that's what started my relationship with Kurt Gotti. And I had found out at the time he had got this information. I believe it was from the writer from the Chicago Tribune, or a friend writer of his. Said he heard about this guy. Said take him to any lake, any reservoir that you choose, and within 1 hour be catching fish. And he proves it. Every time he does, he proves it every time. He said, and I didn't believe it. So he said, if you could really do that, I think we could make a nice little television show here. And that's how all that started. And it was a great promotional thing for me and for Buck and for Buck's material. It finally was getting the world to take notice that there's a better way. There's some scientific facts that once those facts are known, your fishing does a complete changeover. I mean, you just start catching fish and you expect to catch fish, and you do catch fish every time you go fishing. And you catch them bigger fish. So I never forget Kurt. He passed away a few years ago. I never forget him, how much he meant to me and to our business of getting the message out there. And from that television show, ended up developing where I had literally taught some 500,000 students about the truth. But there's 60 million people fishing. And so many of those remaining millions haven't heard this yet. So that's the reason I'm back at it doing these vlogs. But I'm going to tell you a little secret. I told these writers, fish is just a fish, doesn't matter. I can go catch them anywhere. They always do the same things no matter where they are. They don't know that they're living in Florida. They don't know they're living in Pennsylvania. Just a creature controlled by his environment. Does the same stuff all the time. So when I made that statement, I had a fail-safe plan. And if you've been listening to my vlogs, you maybe picked up on it by now. How I could make that statement. Take me to a reservoir, any reservoir, and within 1 hour we'll be catching big fish. Dams, causeways, underwater roadbeds, underwater railroad grades. Man-made structure that leads all the way, easy to locate, easy to fish, clean, workable areas to fish, and always has fish. These structures will always have fish. All I had to do in order to fulfill that claim that I made to these writers, when they gave me a reservoir, I had to locate the dam. Then I had to locate any mid-lake causeways. Then if I was fortunate enough to have a contour map, I would locate roadbeds or railroad grades. And I was ready to go. I didn't need anything else. But the real key to most lowlands and flatlands, you know, the heartland of the country, these reservoirs, and in Texas, the key, man-made structure, first thing I look for. So we just did 2 or 3 weeks on man-made structure. That was my secret. And I must admit, there was one other thing that I always held back a little bit, because I needed to make sure that when we went out there, we were going to catch fish, and good fish, so that I could get my newspaper coverage and reach the people, which is what I did. But the other thing I held back was that I wanted to pick the weather. In other words, if there's a bad cold front go through on Tuesday, a horrendous cold front, I'm not taking him fishing on Wednesday. I'm going to make an excuse. I'm not going to take him fishing till Friday or Saturday. I'm going to let some stability come into that weather. So I let them pick the reservoir, but then I chose the weather. Now, I wasn't waiting for a perfect weather condition. There wasn't enough time to do that. But I wasn't going to purposely go out there the day after a cold front either. I'm not stupid. So I'd make some excuse and take them out 2 or 3 days after. So that's how I operated for years. And I'm telling you, this is not a boast of Don Dickson. This is just thanks to Buck teaching me not only about map interpretation and the importance of structure, but the importance of man-made structure in a man-made reservoir, finding clean areas to fish, and the importance of trolling, especially when fishing these structures. He made sure that I was an expert troller. He made sure I understood that that was the way you fish these structures, especially if you're on the clock. I made the boast I could do it within an hour. I had to cover some ground. I couldn't just start making casts on that dam or that causeway, assuming that I'm going to run into the fish within an hour. I had to move it. Trolling. Talked about the last time we got together. Trolling these structures is the way to go. Now, once I catch bang, bang, 2 fish in the same spot trolling, I'm immediately going to go to the cast. Always do the same thing. But to locate those fish, I'm on the troll on these structures every time. Quickest way of doing it. And I've already had that success. I think I shared the Jack Arisman story with you, the writer from Peoria. Within 45 seconds, he had a 5-pound bass in the boat. Just starting off on a mid-lake causeway. I think it was 183 Causeway on Wren Lake. Never forget it. He thought he was hung up. He thought I was too close to the rocks. He said, I'm hung up. And I threw the boat up into neutral and turned around and was going to start backing up when I saw a big 5-pound bass jumping out of the water. That's normally how it happens. You go to those man-made structures and you start trolling, and I promise you, you're going to run into fish. You'll run into fish every time. If you're under the worst cold frontal condition, you can always get shut down by weather. The weather can be so bad. You can always get shut down. But I'm talking about 98% of the time. You fishing those structures on the troll, you're catching fish. And it doesn't matter. Bass, largemouth, smallmouth, white bass, stripers, walleye, northern pike, muskie. The most muskie I ever caught on the troll on consecutive passes was on an underwater railroad grade. I had a young man from Arizona say, man, you're so right about those road beds. He said, I got one out here about 27 feet deep. He said, man, I catch the stripers. They're on it all the time. And I shared with you about my friend Danny Carpenter with the bazillion stripers he was catching down there on that railroad trestle down in Sam Rayburn. There are stories like that all over the place. Guys that have gotten hip to fishing road beds, railroad grades, dams, and causeways. When you go to a reservoir, most of the time, you don't have to go anywhere else. Now, during the spawn and seasonal movements and all of that, 2-sided bars, we learned all of that stuff for a reason. If it's my home lake, I'm going to know every spot in that lake that produces fish by the time I'm done, period. But if I had to catch a fish, which in most all of my promotional fishing, I did have to. I had to produce. And if I didn't produce, I look pretty foolish. I say we'd be catching big fish and we'd be doing it real quick. And end up not catching any fish? Man, I'd have had to tuck my tail between my legs and get out of town quick. I mean, I couldn't fail. But thanks to Buck, I had a foolproof system. Find your man-made structure, break out your trolling rod and your spoon plugs, and start trolling. And you will run into the fish. You will run into the fish. It's that simple. And I always did. So that was my fail-safe. Find me some man-made structure and go to work. Back in the old days, contour maps weren't everywhere. Sometimes they were impossible to find. And if I had already made a statement to a writer and he agreed to go fishing with me, he said, we're going to go to so-and-so reservoir. And that was the case at Wren Reservoir with the Jack Arisman from Peoria. I couldn't find a contour map. I think I stopped in maybe 6 or 8 tackle stores. No one had one. But he had already chosen the reservoir. So I got the road map up. First thing I saw was this mid-lake causeway, Route 183. It's about 2.5 miles long, I think, crossing over the reservoir. Asked him if there was a boat ramp there. He said, yes. I said, I'll meet you there at daybreak. And about a minute later, he was landing a 5-pound bass after we started fishing. It's the way it works, folks. I'm telling you, man-made structure in man-made reservoirs will save your butt. It's that simple. I choose it first. Why wait? Why go out there in a big flatland reservoir, following a river channel, trying to find your 2-sided bar and see if there's any fish on it? Or are they way up the side feeder stream cut? Or are they out here down 100 yards this way? Or It would be just as easy to just go to the dam, start trolling. Go to the causeway, start trolling. That's what I did. And it was my fail-safe. It never failed me. Ever. Never failed me. You fish that man-made stuff and you have a halfway decent weather condition, you'll be catching fish. But you need to troll it. And friends, if you don't have a trolling rod, trying to troll with a casting rod, or even worse yet, a spinning rod, why, you'll give up in 10 minutes. It's too long, it's too whippy, the line that you have on those reels is too stretchy, and you will never become a troller. You give up in 5 or 10 minutes. It's tiring. You lose lures. And with a trolling rod, it's just like you're sitting in a rocking chair. You can fish all day with the proper gear. So if you don't have a trolling rod, get you one. You know, when I look back on my success in the fishing business, it wasn't always easy. In fact, it was hard. The average person would have quit probably within the first 6 months. It was hard. But I was just determined. I don't know why. I don't know whether it was for the good or not for the good, but I was determined. But the thing I had to take and come to grips with right off the bat was I needed to start trolling. I had never trolled for bass, never even thought of it, much less I had never trolled for walleye, northern pike, muskie, stripers, or any other freshwater species. I never trolled. Buck says, you got to start trolling. He said, trolling will find you all the fish you ever want to catch. He says, now you end up catching more fish on the cast than you do trolling. But you'll find all of those fish by trolling. And in some cases, the only way to catch fish is by trolling. Good example I gave earlier this year, fishing the Winnipeg River with the heavy current. You had to troll. No way you could cast and be thorough in your fishing. So, all that being said, I'm just going to encourage you. Dad, tell your kids, I don't need a new tie. Don't wear ties anymore. But I do need some spoon plugs. And if you don't have that trolling rod, you might even throw that in too to the missus, let her know. Or if it's in the reverse, if mom's the one doing all the fishing, tell your hubby, you need a trolling rod. Because your fishing life will change when you start trolling. I'm telling you, it changed my life. I went from being a stockbroker to a professional fisherman, all because of one of these. And the first time I was with Buck Perry, 55 of the biggest bass I'd ever even dreamed of, much less been part of catching. All caught trolling, one-sided bar in Florida. Trolling is all I did for the first 6 months of my new fishing life. Caught so many fish, it was silly. You couldn't get me to stop and go back to the cast until Buck finally beat it into me. You found the fish. Now it's time to go to the cast and keep your lure right in that spot. But for the first 6 months, I was catching so many fish, I just kept trolling. Because I'd been casting all my life without success. Now all of a sudden, I'm catching fish all the time. So if you want your fishing to really change, and you don't have a little trolling rod like this, and it's important that you have one just like it, get you one. And get that non-stretch, no-bow trolling line. It makes your life easy. You can actually fish all day without getting tired. And you can fish properly. And then, of course, you got to have some spoon plugs. So if you're looking for something to tell your kids that you want for Christmas, let them know this is what you want. Because next year is going to be different. So with all that being said, thanks for being with me today. Appreciate each and every one of you. I want you to follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. It was going pretty good there for a while, but now it's slowed up. I think everybody went hunting for a month or so. But at any rate, we need some subscribers. So if you got a friend who hasn't subscribed yet, push him a little bit. Give us some help. Keep us on the air. So I appreciate you again, and we'll see you the next time.